Think about the device you're watching this on right now. Chances are it crossed an ocean just to get into your hands. Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're unpacking India's massive strategy to transform its oceanic resources into a literal engine for sustainable economic growth. We always hear about land, factories, and cities driving the economy, right? Well, today, we're flipping the script and turning our focus entirely to the sea. Okay, so let's just dive right into this by looking at the sheer scale of the opportunity here. India has this exclusive economic zone, or EEZ for short, that is absolutely massive. We're talking over 2 million square kilometers. To put that into perspective for you, that's roughly the size of the entire country of Mexico, just sitting underwater. It is this vast, resource-rich territory packed with biodiversity and untapped potential that belongs exclusively to India. And when you combine that immense zone with a sprawling 7,500-kilometer coastline, well, it becomes pretty obvious that India is, at its core, a maritime nation. Plus, this coastline is positioned strategically right across the vital sea lanes of the Indian Ocean. We're talking about the literal arteries of global trade here. So unlocking this maritime potential, it's not just a nice-to-have. It is an absolute strategic imperative for India's future. To make sense of all this, here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. First, the maritime imperative. Second, defining Blue Economy 2.0. Third, financial and legal overhaul. Fourth, navigating core maritime challenges. Fifth, strategic and ecological solutions. And finally, number 6, a sustainable maritime future. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the maritime imperative, transforming India's oceanic potential. Now, to reach its ambitious goal of becoming a developed nation by 2047, a vision often called Viksit Bharat, India is completely shifting its approach. Look, for centuries, countries mostly just saw oceans as transit routes for trade or, giant moats for defense. But the blue economy totally redefines that. It's all about using ocean resources to drive real economic growth and create jobs, but, and this is key, doing so while actively protecting marine ecosystems. It's treating the ocean as a sustainable primary economic engine. Which brings us to Section 2, defining Blue Economy 2.0, strategic pillars for coastal and deep-sea development. So, how do they actually pull this off? Well, the entire vision is built on 3 core pillars. It's this incredibly careful balancing act between building massive coastal infrastructure, advancing deep-sea science, and managing sustainable fisheries. Let's break these down one by one to see how the gears actually turn here. Starting with the first pillar, port-led development. Here, we've got the flagship Sagarmala program. Through this, India is radically overhauling its maritime logistics. Get this, as of 2026, major Indian ports crossed a huge milestone, handling over 915 million tons of cargo every single year. Seriously, try to picture that. That is roughly equivalent to moving the weight of thousands of Golden Gate bridges annually. Just a mind-blowing scale. But they aren't just slapping a new coat of paint on old ports. They are building entirely new mega transshipment ports, like Vadhavan in Maharashtra. These are specifically designed to aggressively pull in global shipping traffic. The endgame here? Slashing domestic logistics costs. And why should you care about that? Because when logistics become cheaper and more efficient, global supply chains run smoother, which ultimately means the price of goods on your local store shelves goes down. Moving on to the second pillar, sustainable deep-sea fisheries. According to Niti Aayog's recent roadmap, India is transitioning its fishing industry from an open-access free-for-all into a strictly regulated, scientifically managed system. This lets them sustainably harvest resources up to 200 nautical miles out. It's a really delicate balance, actually. They're deliberately protecting traditional artisanal fishers close to shore while simultaneously unleashing the power of advanced commercial vessels way out in the deep sea. And for the third pillar, we have the Deep Ocean Mission, launched by the Ministry of Earth Sciences. This is where cutting-edge science literally meets economics. A huge focus here is deep-sea mining for polymetallic nodules. Think of these as basically potato-sized rocks scattered across the ocean floor, just absolutely packed with the crucial metals we need for things like electric vehicle batteries. By pushing into this space, alongside offshore wind, tidal energy, and blue carbon projects like mangrove restoration, India is joining a very elite club of nations capable of advanced underwater exploration. But obviously, you can't just talk about this stuff. You have to pay for it. That brings us to Section 3, financial and legal overhaul. From policy planning to robust enablement. To execute these massive pillars, you need serious institutional muscle. Financially, they've set up the Sagarmala Finance Corporation Limited, which is India's first dedicated maritime non-banking financial company. They've already sanctioned over 10,700 crore rupees for infrastructure. There's also a brand new maritime investment fund for long-term capital. And on the legal side, well, the government realized some centuries-old laws were just dragging them down, so they completely overhauled the legislation, rolling out the Coastal Shipping Bill, the Merchant Shipping Bill, and the Indian Ports Bill. It's all about making it way easier to do business while legally enforcing those strict ecological safeguards. Now, it's not all smooth sailing. Let's look at Section 4, Navigating Core Maritime Challenges: Environmental, Security, and Geopolitical Risks. We absolutely have to acknowledge the reality here. Expanding an economy on this scale across such a vast ocean creates a lot of friction. Our oceans are incredibly sensitive ecosystems. Rapidly expanding ports, building coastal industries, and dealing with widespread plastic pollution, all of this poses a very real, severe threat to marine biodiversity and drives coastal erosion. And if commercial practices like bottom trawling are left unchecked, that essentially bulldozes fragile marine habitats. It can totally devastate an ecosystem. Plus, this isn't solely about the environment. It is also a high-stakes geopolitical game of cat and mouse. The Indian Ocean region is seeing intense friction right now, especially with a sharp rise in illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, often called IUU fishing, carried out by foreign fleets. This isn't just an annoyance. It is a serious security challenge that threatens the livelihoods of domestic workers and aggressively tests national sovereignty. So how do you fix that? Let's move to Section 5, Strategic and Ecological Solutions, Striking the Correct Balance. To tackle these huge threats, India is using a really interesting two-pronged defense. On the environmental front, the policy mandates something called marine spatial planning, which basically just ensures that any coastal development is zoned out sustainably. And on the geopolitical front, they're leaning on the SAGAR vision to maintain regional stability. Let's zoom in on how both of these work in practice. On the environmental side, the overarching rule is pretty straightforward. You can't have economic growth if it destroys the ecology. Climate-adaptive safeguards are literally hardwired into these new Blue Economy 2.0 projects. That means active conservation efforts, like restoring coral reefs and mangroves, have to happen side by side with building massive industrial ports. That is a very rare, incredibly difficult combination to pull off. It's a strict dual mandate of growth and protection. Geopolitically, the key solution here is the SAGAR initiative, which stands for Security and Growth for All in the Region. Through this, India is strictly enforcing the rules of its exclusive economic zone and massively beefing up its maritime domain awareness. By pushing for a rules-based order in the Indian Ocean, India wants to ensure strong maritime security, which directly protects the rights and the daily catch of millions of domestic fishers. And that brings us to our final stop. Section 6, A Sustainable Maritime Future: India's Destiny as a Global Maritime Powerhouse. When you boil it all down, the true essence of this whole strategy is a massive shift away from just exploiting the ocean toward being responsible stewards of it. By blending heavy infrastructure upgrades like the Sagarmala program with the hardcore science of the Deep Ocean Mission, and backing the whole shebang with serious financial firepower, India is taking very deliberate steps to cement its destiny as a global maritime powerhouse. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought for today's explainer. As land-based resources get stretched thin and our oceans truly become the ultimate frontier for global growth, how will nations manage to walk this incredibly fine line? Will the sea lanes of tomorrow belong to those who can perfectly balance vast economic ambition with strict ecological restraint? It's a fascinating question. But one thing is for sure. Watching India chart the sustainable blue economy gives us a really hopeful glimpse into the future of our oceans. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.
Welcome to the Explainer. I am so incredibly pumped to dive into this with you today. We're looking at something absolutely fascinating in global geopolitics: India's nuclear doctrine. As a responsible nuclear-armed state, India is sitting right in the middle of a highly unique two-front security challenge. So what we're going to do in this explainer is unpack exactly how they balance a deeply defensive, almost moral stance with the absolute hard power readiness you need to protect your sovereignty. Honestly, it's a total masterclass in strategic balance.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the inherent paradox sitting right at the center of their posture. I mean, think about it. How do you build a nuclear arsenal that you hope to literally never use? We're talking about weapons of ultimate destruction, requiring massive tech and financial investments, but they are specifically designed and framed as tools of absolute restraint. It totally flips conventional military instincts on its head to pour all these resources into a system whose primary goal is to just stay away in its silo or on its submarine forever. To make sense of it all, we're going to move through 5 logical steps: the deterrence paradox, the pillars of the doctrine, the nuclear triad, a shifting strategic balance, and finally, the path forward.
Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, the deterrence paradox, which was formally adopted in 2003.
So, the foundational philosophy here completely breaks away from those aggressive Cold War mentalities where major powers treated nuclear arsenals as active, war-fighting instruments. Instead, India views its arsenal purely defensively. They see them as political weapons of absolute restraint. The whole purpose is just to deter adversaries and prevent war entirely. By taking this stance, they intentionally avoid the massive economic drain of a runaway arms race. It's basically a calculated way of saying, look, we have this power, but its only purpose is to make sure absolutely no one dares to attack us.
Moving on to Section 2, the pillars of the doctrine. To really understand the paradox, we need to look at the rules. And these are the 4 non-negotiable rules forming that defensive yet highly punitive framework. Number 1, credible minimum deterrence, or CMD. Number 2, a strict no first-use policy. Number 3, massive punitive retaliation. And number 4, civilian political control, meaning the authority to actually release these weapons rests strictly with civilian leadership, specifically the Nuclear Command Authority, led by the Prime Minister.
So the crucial point here with credible minimum deterrence is that it is not about having the biggest stockpile. It's about maintaining the absolute minimum number of warheads you need to convincingly deter an adversary. The magic word there is credible. It's all about effectiveness, completely rejecting a numbers-based arms race. You literally just need enough to guarantee the other guy knows they'll face total devastation if they try anything.
But we really have to look closely at that no first-use policy, because it comes with a massive qualifier. Yes, India binds itself to never initiate a nuclear strike. However, a nuclear response automatically gets triggered if Indian territory or Indian forces anywhere are attacked with nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons. If deterrence fails, the doctrine mandates a retaliation that is massive and designed to inflict unacceptable damage on the attacker. So the restraint is absolute, right up until that line is crossed. Then it's total retaliation.
Which brings us to Section 3, the nuclear triad, and why second strike capability is absolutely essential.
Because look, a no first-use policy is completely useless without an indestructible second strike capability. To make it credible, you have to be able to launch from land, air, and sea. On land, you've got the Agni series featuring MIRV capabilities, that's multiple warheads on a single missile for deep strategic penetration. Up in the air, strategic bombers like the Mirage 2000HA, Jaguar, and Rafale give tactical flexibility, but out at sea, that is your absolute indestructible backbone, the Arihant-class nuclear-powered submarines. They offer ultimate survivability. Even if a first strike wipes out your land bases, those submarines, hidden in the deep ocean, guarantee your ability to strike back.
And this brilliantly illustrates an evolutionary shift reported by First Post. Historically, to stop accidental launches, India kept its warheads strictly separated from delivery systems during peacetime. But the modern operational posture is transitioning toward canisterized missile systems, and live warheads are reportedly deployed on submarine deterrence patrols. By keeping weapons ready at a much shorter notice, they are directly enhancing the credibility part of that credible minimum deterrence.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, a shifting strategic balance, and the reality of expanding arsenals.
Now, why the shift in posture? Well, maintaining minimum deterrence while you're surrounded by expanding arsenals is incredibly complex. If we look at the 2026 CPRI yearbook data, we see the numbers shaping the region neutrally laid out. India's stockpile has grown to an estimated 190 warheads, actually overtaking Pakistan's 170 for the first time. But the real standout is China's rapid expansion to over 600 warheads. So India's stockpile is completely dwarfed by China's.
And this creates a dramatically changing threat profile. Historically, the challenge for India was Pakistan's tactical brinkmanship, but today the primary strategic focus has shifted heavily toward China's rapid expansion. That puts massive pressure on the word minimum in India's doctrine. In fact, it sparks occasional but very real public debates about whether no first use binds India's hands against a surprise attack and whether they should consider a preemptive stance.
Let's move to Section 5, the path forward, and see how this all builds toward a technological shift.
So, how does India actually resolve the tension of this new threat profile? Well, according to the source material, abandoning no first use would just destabilize the region and hurt India's standing as a responsible global power. So the solution isn't changing the doctrine, it's modernizing the tech. Step 1, maintain NFU. Step 2, deploy advanced tech like MRVs, which we saw in Mission to Vyastra. Step 3, strengthen ballistic missile defense shields. And Step 4, really mature that sea-based submarine deterrence. By leaning into technology, India ensures its second strike is completely unstoppable, without getting sucked into building an excessively large, expensive stockpile to match its neighbors one for one.
Which leaves us with this final, really fascinating question. Does true peace rely on the absolute certainty of a devastating second blow? India's entire nuclear doctrine relies on proving exactly that. It's this unique blend of the ethical restraint of a democracy paired with unflinching military resolve. It argues that true deterrence doesn't lie in the desire to strike first, it's about the unstoppable certainty of retaliation. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this deep dive into India's strategic balance was as eye-opening for you as it was for me. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here because, honestly, we are about to unpack a massive, highly dynamic, and just completely vital piece of India's national security puzzle. You know, when we think about a nation's defense, it's so easy to just focus on the big military hardware, the stuff that always makes the front pages. But what about the day-to-day gritty reality of protecting a sprawling, multi-million square kilometer maritime frontier? Well, today, we're demystifying the Indian Coast Guard. We're going to look closely at their origins, their immense daily responsibilities, and how they secure both the economic and ecological future of literally one of the fastest-growing nations on Earth. All right, let's dive right into this. So here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to cover 1, the origins of the Coast Guard, 2, their core maritime mission, 3, current operations and upgrades, 4, India's modern security stance, 5, challenges and solutions ahead, and 6, our final takeaway. All right, starting off with Section 1, Origins of the Coast Guard. Basically, what is it and how did it all start? 2 million. I just want you to let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering size of India's exclusive economic zone in square kilometers. It's this massive expanse of ocean where India actually holds special rights for exploring and using marine resources. The sheer scale of this responsibility is just mind-boggling. I mean, India's economic and strategic prosperity is deeply, deeply tied to this vast territory, which actually brings up a really important distinction. Now, you might be wondering, doesn't the Navy just handle all that water? Well, it's absolutely crucial to understand who does what out there. The Indian Navy, they're focused on blue water operations, external threats, and of course, wartime readiness. But bridging the gap between your local coastal state police and that massive blue water navy is the Indian Coast Guard. They are the ones handling the daily maritime law enforcement, the everyday coastal safety, and they act as this massive domestic police gap filler. They're literally the ones out there enforcing the law day in and day out. And this responsibility didn't just happen overnight. It evolved immensely. Back in 1977, the Coast Guard started as a pretty modest formation under the Ministry of Defense. But the real game changer, that happened in 2008. Following the tragic Mumbai terror attacks, there was a massive structural shift. It officially designated the Coast Guard as the ultimate authority responsible for coastal security in territorial waters. And fast forward to February 2026, this once modest force is celebrating its 50th Golden Jubilee, standing incredibly tall as the 4th largest Coast Guard in the entire world. Because of this intense evolution, they've earned a very specific, hard-won reputation. Today, the Indian Coast Guard is widely known as the Wall of Trust. They're the de facto frontline force. Think of them as a multi-layered barrier against threats and the absolute most reliable responder for India's maritime security. They're the steady hand guarding the shoreline. Moving to Section 2, the core maritime mission. Why is all of this so incredibly important? Well, their security matrix really relies on 4 diverse pillars. First up, maritime law enforcement and anti-smuggling. They're constantly patrolling the contiguous zone in the EEZ to stop smuggling, illegal fishing, human trafficking, and piracy. We're talking about seizing thousands of crores worth of contraband here. Second, they're the primary go-to agency for maritime search and rescue. Third is marine environmental protection. If there's a major oil spill or chemical leak, they coordinate the response to protect those fragile ecosystems. And fourth, offshore security. They actually provide physical protection for critical national infrastructure, like massive oil and gas platforms. So they aren't just out there chasing smugglers, they are literally safeguarding the economy and the environment. Listen to this number: 11,800. That is the number of human lives saved at sea by the Indian Coast Guard. Whether it's coordinating these insanely complex rescue operations for sinking merchant vessels or pulling stranded domestic fishers out of the water during a brutal cyclone, this number, 11,800, is the ultimate proof of their dedication to human life. And honestly, it all comes back to their solemn motto, Vayam Rakshama, which simply translates to "we protect." When you look at those lives saved and that whole wall of trust concept we talked about, you can really see how deeply this motto is woven into the very fabric of their daily operations. Okay, Section 3, current operations and upgrades. What exactly is happening out there right now? Looking at their current operational muscle for the 2025 to 2026 timeframe, it's really defined by three major initiatives. First, the Coastal Surveillance Network, or CSN. Through their Phase 2 upgrades, which involve static radars, day and night cameras, the whole shebang, they have achieved near gap-free electronic surveillance of the entire coastline. Second is Operation Sindoor. This is the advanced deployment of strategic assets and heightened alerts in those highly sensitive western coastal and creek regions. It's been heavily praised for seamless inter-service coordination. And finally, bilateral interoperability. Just in January 2026, they held their 22nd high-level meeting with the Japan Coast Guard, executing these really complex hazardous substance response drills in Mumbai to boost regional rules-based maritime order. Which brings us to Section 4, India's modern security stance. What is India's actual strategy or stand here? You know, what's truly fascinating about India's approach to coastal defense is that it doesn't just rely on high-tech hardware. Through something called Community Interaction Programs, or CIPs, the Coast Guard actually educates and treats local fishermen networks as a massive strategic resource. By empowering them, they've effectively transformed the local fishing community into the eyes and ears of coastal security. It creates this huge, decentralized network to report any suspicious vessels. It is such a highly effective, community-driven layer of defense. All right, Section 5, challenges and solutions ahead. Because obviously, it's not all smooth sailing. What should be done? A major challenge today is dealing with modern hybrid threats and asymmetric warfare. Non-state actors, terrorists, drug cartels, they often use these tiny, unregistered fishing boats, which makes physical monitoring just immensely difficult. So to counter this without totally draining human manpower, the Coast Guard is proactively procuring shipborne, unmanned aerial systems. UAVs, basically, and advanced search and rescue simulators to ensure far better over-the-horizon tracking. Then you also have the economic challenge. Right now, India is experiencing this massive expansion of its blue economy. Think huge port construction, offshore wind fields, much deeper commercial fishing. Now, because traditional law enforcement can sometimes accidentally become a bottleneck for all this economic trade, the Coast Guard has developed a really smart hub-and-spoke partnership with the local marine police. By streamlining standard operating procedures and providing structural training, they ensure that security remains incredibly robust, but efficient enough to let domestic trade thrive. Security and prosperity, they literally have to go hand in hand. And finally, Section 6, the final takeaway, our conclusion. To sum it all up, the Indian Coast Guard has successfully evolved from a pretty modest auxiliary force into a massive, modern, and just completely irreplaceable pillar of India's national security framework. By acting as the very first responder to human and ecological emergencies at sea and protecting the nation's immense marine wealth, they are actively securing the very foundations of India's 2047 roadmap to becoming a developed nation. They are the guardians ensuring that all this economic progress isn't derailed by maritime vulnerabilities. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. We've seen how they've grown into the world's fourth largest Coast Guard, saving tens of thousands of lives and building this incredible technological and community-based defense matrix. But the ocean is vast, and the threats out there are constantly evolving. As India's blue economy booms toward that 2047 horizon, is our coastal wall of trust fully ready for the complex, hybrid future that lies ahead? It's a really delicate balance of booming economic trade and the relentless need for maritime vigilance. And it's absolutely one that will define the region for decades to come. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope you found it as fascinating as I did. Imagine a war where the first casualty isn't a soldier on a battlefield, but your city's power grids suddenly going dark. Crazy, right? Well, hello and welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving deep into a topic that is quietly, but literally reshaping the world as we know it. We usually think of conflict in super traditional terms, don't we? We picture these clearly defined front lines, formal declarations of war, and massive armies clashing. But hey, the reality of global security? It has fundamentally shifted. Gone are those days. The most intense battles today aren't just being fought with tanks and troops. No, they are being waged with invisible forces right under our noses. Welcome to the era of hybrid warfare. It's a complex, kind of shadowy domain for sure. But by the end of our explainer today, you're going to understand exactly what it is, how it works, and why it matters to you. Okay, let's dive into our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting 5 key areas. First, defining modern hybrid warfare. Second, the core pillars of conflict. Third, the global evolution and reality. Fourth, India's frontline security challenges. And finally, number 5, the whole of nation defense. Let's get to it. Section 1. Defining modern hybrid warfare. So, what exactly is this threat, and why is it absolutely crucial we understand it right now? For generations, we all totally understood conventional warfare, right? It was black and white. You had formal declarations, you knew exactly where the front line was, and it was military against military. But hybrid warfare? That is an entirely different beast. It's this wild, multidimensional blending of conventional military force with totally unconventional methods. We're talking about devastating cyber attacks, massive disinformation campaigns, and brutal economic coercion. And the kicker? The goal here isn't to achieve some decisive battlefield victory through total physical destruction. Instead, the objective is to destabilize an adversary from the inside out. It's all about creating chaos without ever officially declaring war. Now, this brings us to a foundational vocabulary term you absolutely need to know: the gray zone. Think of this as a highly interconnected, shadowy space where adversaries purposely blur the lines between peace and war. And why do they do this? Well, in our modern, hyper-connected world, avoiding direct, decisive battlefield destruction is actually a massive strategic advantage. I mean, you don't want to trigger an all-out global war, but you still want to project power and cripple your opponent, right? So this gray zone has essentially become the go-to mechanism for global power projection today. It's happening all around us, often without us even realizing it's going on. All right, moving into Section 2, core pillars of conflict. Let's break this massive threat down into its 3 main parts. Now, what's really interesting here is how we can translate these theories into the everyday tools adversaries are actually using. Take a look at the first pillar, cyber and electromagnetic warfare. Instead of dropping physical bombs, state actors are deploying advanced malware, ransomware, and massive DDoS attacks to just completely cripple critical national infrastructure. We're talking power grids, financial networks, communication hubs. To put that into perspective, global ransomware damages cost billions of dollars every single year. It's literally an invisible tax on a nation's infrastructure. Then we've got the second pillar, information and cognitive warfare. This is where they target our minds. By weaponizing social media, AI-generated deepfakes, and fake news, they exploit existing fault lines in democratic societies. The goal? Distort public perception, mess with elections, and completely erode our trust in national institutions. And finally, the third pillar, economic and proxy coercion. This is where they weaponize the very things we rely on every day, like trade and supply chains. Think shadow fleets navigating around global sanctions or quietly funding domestic extremist groups to stir up internal chaos, all without leaving a single fingerprint that links back to a foreign military. Wild, isn't it? Let's shift gears to Section 3, global evolution and reality. How did this start, and what is actually happening out there right now? The most prominent example we're seeing today is what security analysts call the Russia-Ukraine framework. Now, when we look at this conflict, sure, there's heavy conventional fighting and physical destruction, but this theater is essentially a masterclass in deep hybrid convergence. The physical missile and drone strikes, they aren't happening in isolation. No way. They are precisely, flawlessly synchronized with massive cyber intrusions and electronic warfare specifically designed to jam communications and take out GPS infrastructure. It's a data-driven reality where the digital disruption happens at the exact same time as the physical strikes. And this brilliantly illustrates what's happening outside that immediate war zone too. Adversaries are applying what we call deniable gray zone pressure across European capitals. We're talking about suspected undersea infrastructure sabotage, like those mysterious ruptures of Baltic Sea telecommunications cables we've seen on the news, along with bizarre cases of arson and proxy subversion. It is a highly calculated strategy to fracture political solidarity in Europe, but carefully done without crossing the threshold that would trigger a formal collective military retaliation. It's incredibly effective simply because it's so frustratingly difficult to definitively prove. We are also seeing this evolve at breakneck speed in the Middle East, which has essentially become a proving ground for synchronized cyber-physical warfare. Kinetic drone assaults are being executed side by side with destructive, state-backed ransomware attacks. And they aren't just hacking random laptops. They are specifically targeting critical logistics and aviation networks. The primary goal here is to totally disorient command structures. Think about it. If you can blind an opponent's logistics network digitally, right before a physical drone strike hits, you multiply the effectiveness of your attack exponentially. It's a real game changer. Which brings us to Section 4, India's frontline security challenges. Let's look at how this directly impacts a rising economic and technological power. Let's walk through how this builds, step by logical step, for Indian security planners. Step 1. Persistent gray zone threats kick off with state-sponsored cyber espionage, specifically targeting highly critical infrastructure like regional electricity dispatch centers. Okay, then we move to Step 2. This invisible hacking is combined with sophisticated cross-border information manipulation campaigns. Basically, attackers use digital platforms to spread massive amounts of disinformation, which leads us right into Step 3, the deliberate fueling of social disharmony, by attacking the digital infrastructure and attacking the cognitive space of the public at the exact same time. Adversaries put immense, daily pressure on security planners. It is just this seamless, dangerous blend of invisible technical attacks and psychological warfare. Now for Section 5, the whole of nation defense. So what on earth do we actually do about all this? To find a solution, nations have to navigate a really precarious balance. On one side, you've got the ambiguity challenge. These hybrid operations are almost always executed via criminal proxies, anonymous hacktivists, or super deniable cyber units. On the other side, that creates a massive legal defense hurdle. Because you simply cannot identify the true perpetrator with absolute legal certainty, targeted nations are incredibly hesitant to activate traditional collective defense treaties. I mean, if you can't legally prove who attacked your power grid, you definitely can't just launch a retaliatory military strike without facing massive international backlash. It's a complete catch-22. And you know, this ambiguity often leads to a very dangerous trap. In trying to counter all this disinformation or cyber subversion, states risk totally overreacting. They might hit the panic button and implement broad censorship or even regular internet blackouts. But here is the thing. Those actions carry severe risks. They stifle domestic economic growth and seriously compromise civil liberties. It's such a delicate balance. Honestly, if a state overreacts to subversion and accidentally causes its own internal economic and social chaos, they are actually doing the adversary's job for them. That internal chaos was the attacker's original goal from day one. So the crucial point is, we need a completely new paradigm. We need what top security analysts call a whole-of-nation approach. Countering a hybrid threat means shifting away from relying purely on military defense. It requires fully integrating the public and private sectors to build robust cyber resilience. The government literally cannot do it alone. Private tech companies, banks, and yes, everyday citizens all have to be woven into the security fabric. It also means fighting fire with fire. We have to deploy advanced real-time AI tools to detect and neutralize foreign narrative manipulation before it has a chance to poison public discourse. At the exact same time, the military itself has to evolve. Conventional readiness is absolutely still important, but it's got to be balanced. Our armed forces must be trained to fight in these new digital and cognitive domains. Militaries have to be able to totally dominate the electromagnetic spectrum, jamming enemy signals while keeping their own communications bulletproof. And crucially, nations have to deploy advanced indigenous technological platforms. Relying entirely on foreign technology in a gray zone conflict, that is a vulnerability no nation can afford to have anymore. As we wrap up this analysis, I really want you to take a second and internalize what this all means for you personally. The definitive face of modern conflict has fundamentally changed. The new frontline? It's no longer just some geographical border thousands of miles away. No, the front line is right here. It is inside our digital servers, it is woven into our global supply chains, and honestly, most intimately, it is in our cognitive spaces. It's the media we consume, the social networks we scroll through, and the trust we place in our own institutions. You are standing on the front line every single time you log on. Ultimately, the future belongs to nations that can perfectly balance physical military readiness with a completely bulletproof cyber defense and a truly resilient sociopolitical fabric, because it's clearly not just about surviving physical missiles anymore. So I'll leave you with this stark, pretty heavy question drawn directly from our security analysis today. Can your nation withstand the silent corruption of invisible wars? It's something we all need to be thinking about as we navigate this wild new era of global security. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Stay curious, and I'll see you next time. Welcome, everyone, to today's explainer. We are looking at something that is literally reshaping the world as we know it. Today, we're talking about the alchemy of sovereignty. Specifically, we're going to look at how securing vital resources has completely transformed. It's gone from a simple trade issue to an absolute, non-negotiable strategic security imperative for India. You see, if India is going to achieve its grand vision of a Viksit Bharat, a developed India, by the year 2047, and actually hit its net zero emissions targets by 2070, the battleground won't be over traditional resources. No, it's going to be over the hidden elements in the earth. Okay, let's dive right into this. We'll be tracing the journey from the new global currency to why these minerals are critical, then looking at the supply chain monopoly, India's strategic countermoves, navigating challenges and solutions, and we'll wrap up with the future of sovereignty. Section 1. The new global currency. The shift from black gold to hidden elements. To truly grasp how it started and where we are today, we really need to anchor ourselves in this massive shift in 21st century geopolitics. Just think back to the 20th century for a second. Global dominance, major alliances, and, well, even conflicts were primarily fought over one thing, right? Black gold, crude oil. But look at the 21st century, the future of global dominance, the massive rollout of green technology, and the advancement of next-generation defense systems. They don't depend on oil anymore. They depend entirely on what we call critical minerals. We've literally traded the oil wells of the past for the high-tech element mines of the future. So what exactly is it? Well, critical minerals are essentially the fundamental building blocks of our modern era. We're talking about elements like lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite, and rare earth elements, or REEs for short. If you want to build electric vehicles, solar panels, semiconductors, or advanced military hardware, you absolutely must have these materials. There's just no way around it. If oil was the muscle of the 20th century, these minerals are the brains and the nervous system of the 21st. And because they are so deeply essential to how a nation functions, securing them isn't just an economic priority anymore. It is an absolute strategic priority. Section 2. Why are they critical? Multilateral sector dependencies. 30. That is the magic number right there. The Indian Ministry of Mines has officially identified exactly 30 critical minerals that are absolutely essential for both the nation's economic growth and its national security. That's 30 specific elements that the country simply cannot afford to run out of. And this brilliantly illustrates why this is so important, because these dependencies connect across every part of your daily life. First up, clean energy and mobility. You need silicon, tellurium, and gallium just to make photovoltaic solar cells work, while lithium and nickel are what actually get electric vehicles moving. Then, think about defense and aerospace. Rare earth permanent magnets are completely non-negotiable if you want to produce guidance systems for missiles, fighter jets, radar infrastructure, or even nuclear tech. And it's not just high-tech gadgets either, it's our basic survival. Elements like potash are vital for manufacturing fertilizers, so critical mineral security is directly linked to agricultural independence and literally the food on our tables. Section 3. The supply chain monopoly. The threat of geographic concentration. Now let's look at what is happening now. Unlike conventional commodities like wheat or timber, the extraction of critical minerals is incredibly, and I mean dangerously, monopolized. Take cobalt, for example. It's a crucial component in lithium-ion batteries. Yet, over 70% of the world's entire cobalt supply comes from just one single country, the Democratic Republic of Congo. That is a staggering geographic choke point. But the monopoly doesn't just stop at pulling rocks out of the ground. It extends heavily into processing. What's really interesting about this slide is the sheer gravity of these numbers. China controls over 60% of global lithium extraction, and even more alarmingly, they have a nearly 90% chokehold on rare earth magnet processing. Refining these elements is where the real power lies, and currently, almost all roads lead to one single destination.
Which brings us to a pretty harsh domestic reality for India. Historically, India has relied on imports for 100% of its lithium, cobalt, and nickel needs. 100%. It's like building this massive high-tech fortress, but having to import every single brick. This means that if any sudden geopolitical flashpoint, a trade war, or a supply chain blockade were to happen, India's industrial and defense growth could be instantly crippled. It is a massive vulnerability, and it requires an immediate, powerful response.
Section 4. India's strategic countermoves. Breaking the monopoly. So, what is India's stand? Well, India is no longer sitting on the sidelines as a passive importer. They are shifting into an aggressive player, executing sweeping legislative and financial frameworks to fight back. At the top of this matrix is the National Critical Minerals Mission, or NCMM, coming in with a massive 34,300 crore rupee outlay. This is a targeted 7-year roadmap to launch 1,200 domestic projects and secure 50 global mining assets by 2031. To back this up, through the amended MMDR Act, we are seeing over 100 domestic blocks targeted for fast-tracked commercial private mining. Then there's the push for downstream value with a 7,280 crore rupee scheme for integrated rare earth corridors across states like Odisha, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu. And finally, mineral diplomacy. By concluding the major May 2026 India-US framework, India is securing processing supply chains and joining global initiatives like POC Silica, which is a network of allied nations sharing mineral tech and resources to actively counter these monopolies.
Section 5. Navigating Challenges and Solutions. Building Processing and Protecting Ecology.
Because, look, discovering raw minerals, like those recent lithium reserves found in Jammu and Kashmir or Rajasthan, is really only half the battle. We have to ask ourselves, what happens after we mine the ore? If we just pull it out of the ground and send all these raw domestic ores abroad because we lock the midstream refining capabilities, well, we completely defeat the purpose of self-reliance, right? So, what should be done? How do we fix this processing gap while protecting the environment? Well, step 1 is heavy investment in indigenous processing. The Ministry of Mines is actually funding pilot projects right now to extract minerals from industrial waste byproducts, things like red mud and fly ash. Step 2 is building secondary resource pools through a circular economy, backed by the 1,500 crore rupee critical mineral recycling scheme. And crucially, step 3 addresses the environment. Because critical mineral mining is framed as a matter of strategic security, fast-tracking it could easily lead to ecological damage or tribal displacement. To prevent the misuse of these ecological exemptions, the government has to strictly enforce the amended VAN rules. This means forcing commercial miners to execute double the extent of compensatory afforestation on degraded lands and ensuring they deploy state-of-the-art green mining tech. Sustainability simply cannot be sacrificed for security.
Section 6. The future of sovereignty. Securing the 21st century.
So, what is my conclusion here? The crucial point is this. Aggressive domestic exploration and brilliant international alliances are absolutely fantastic first steps. But to ensure absolute, strategic sovereignty moving forward, India must continue to delicately balance its massive global geopolitical alignments with a rapid, unwavering push for our own domestic technological indigenization. We have to be able to refine and process what we pull out of the earth ourselves. I want to leave you with this final, powerful thought. The nations that secure the supply chains of these hidden elements will dictate the global order of tomorrow. Are we moving fast enough to ensure we are one of those nations dictating the future rather than depending on it? Thank you to all you focused learners out there for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope this gave you a whole new perspective on the invisible alchemy powering our world. See you next time.
Okay, picture a modern battlefield for a second. The greatest threat out there right now, it actually isn't just enemy fire. It's a relentless, blinding flood of digital information. We're talking data pouring in from drones, radar arrays, and cyber networks at speeds that are honestly just unimaginable. Welcome to today's explainer. We're going to cut right through all that noise to look at exactly how artificial intelligence is stepping into this chaos and literally revolutionizing modern warfare.
So, to really grasp what military AI is and why it's absolutely crucial right now, we've got to ask, how do commanders even survive this data flood? We are living in an era of what military experts call hypervelocity operations. Just think about that term. In any given conflict today, petabytes of data are generated every single minute.
I mean, human cognition, even the biological processing power of the most brilliant military commander, it's pushed to its absolute breaking point. A human mind just can't filter through that much raw data in real time. So what do? Well, they turn to the machine.
All right, here's how we're going to break this down today. First, we'll look at the hypervelocity warfare era. Then we'll get into the AI strategic battlefield advantages. Third, the global and Indian AI frontlines. Fourth, we'll confront the black box problem. And finally, we'll wrap up with the human in the loop. Kicking things off with Section 1, the hypervelocity warfare era and the data flood. You know, even before AI really entered the picture, modern warfare had already fundamentally changed. The physical battlefield became totally tangled up with the digital one. The problem wasn't gathering information anymore. The problem was that suddenly we just had way too much of it.
Let's dive right into what this means. AI isn't just some fancy new tool here. It is the ultimate force multiplier. It takes the existing combat potential of a military force and just exponentially increases it. How? Well, by taking those petabytes of raw, chaotic sensor data and processing them in literal milliseconds. Just think about how long it used to take human analysts to pore over aerial photographs or dig through intercept logs. Now, AI transforms that blinding data flood into actionable, real-time intelligence for commanders on the ground instantly.
So it really comes down to this crazy contrast. On one side of the modern battlefield, you have strict human cognitive limits. A person needs time to sit down, watch drone footage, cross-reference it with radar pings, and read through cyber reports. But on the other side, you have AI millisecond processing. The algorithm filters, categorizes, and analyzes that exact same mountain of intelligence in the blink of an eye. The AI doesn't get tired, it doesn't get overwhelmed by the noise, and it never ever misses a single pixel of data. Moving on to Section 2, AI Strategic Battlefield Advantages, specifically looking at speed, logistics, and simulation. Let's see what actually happens when militaries deploy these algorithms out in the real world.
There are three core areas completely revolutionizing tactical readiness today. We've got sensor-to-shooter speed, predictive logistics, and advanced wargaming. Take wargaming, for example. Generative AI models can actually simulate millions of complex battlefield scenarios in like the time it takes you to brew a cup of coffee. It gives commanders mathematically backed insights into which tactical choices actually have the highest probability of success. It's absolutely wild.
Now, the really crucial point here regarding sensor-to-shooter speed is time compression. In a hypervelocity combat scenario, time is hands down your most valuable asset. Imagine a drone spots an anomaly. Boom! Within seconds, AI has cross-referenced it with satellite data and armed a response. AI radically shrinks that lethal timeline. What used to take a whole chain of human command minutes or even hours to calculate can now be executed almost instantaneously. And then, well beyond the active firefight, we have predictive logistics. Honestly, think of this like the most highly advanced check engine light imaginable. AI algorithms are constantly, continuously monitoring the structural and mechanical data of military hardware. When a single fighter jet engine costs tens of millions of dollars, right? A reactive repair is a massive strategic failure. But the AI, it can actually predict mechanical failures before they ever happen in the field, which guarantees an incredibly high state of operational readiness.
All right, let's jump into Section 3, Global and Indian AI Frontlines. We're going to transition from these theoretical advantages to the actual digital front lines being set up by global superpowers and see exactly where India stands in this whole arms race.
We can clearly see how different nations are actually tailoring AI to their own specific strategic threats. Take the U.S. Department of Defense's Project Maven, for instance. It uses AI to scan thousands of hours of drone footage, and its primary goal is to automatically detect and flag insurgent activity in general conflict zones. But then, on the flip side, we have India's Project Sainik. The Indian Army has integrated this specialized AI-powered target recognition software designed specifically to automate surveillance and detect cross-border infiltrations. And it does this through dense, natural camouflage along its northern borders. It's just a highly proactive, highly specialized deployment.
But hey, we really need to pause here and shift gears for Section 4, the black box problem, ethical risks, and cyber threats. Because as incredible as all these advancements are, they come with some severe complications and bottlenecks that we simply cannot ignore.
This is probably the most terrifying bottleneck in military AI, the black box problem. Deep learning models are just so complex that they often cannot explain how or why they reached a specific conclusion. So think about the massive ethical blur that creates. If a military AI model misidentifies a civilian vehicle as a military threat and it literally cannot show its work, who gets held ethically accountable for that?
If a commander can't explain why their system pulled the trigger, international law faces a total crisis.
And you know what? That's just an internal flaw. Consider an external cyber threat known as data poisoning. Here's how it works. Step 1. Adversaries manage to secretly hack the initial training data that the military AI is learning from. Step 2. The AI unknowingly learns flawed, manipulated patterns from this poisoned data. And then step 3. The autonomous systems fail predictably, exactly when the adversary wants them to, during critical combat operations. It is just a seamless, truly devastating way to sabotage AI from the inside out. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the human in the loop, ethics, and the way forward. How on earth do we safely harness this inescapable evolution of warfare while mitigating those massive risks we just talked about? Let's look at the way forward.
Look, the reality is incredibly clear. AI integration is completely inevitable. Nations, including India, absolutely must rapidly invest in military AI research. Falling behind in hypervelocity warfare, it's just not an option. However, scaling this technology absolutely requires robust safeguards. Without strict ethical protocols, militaries run a huge risk of catastrophic, machine-led escalation. The AI simply has to be controlled.
And that really leads to my conclusion, which is perfectly summarized by this golden rule in modern military ethics. AI should advise, but the final ethical decision to pull the trigger must remain human. This establishes a firm, uncrossable line of accountability. The machine can process the petabytes of data, it can compress the timeline, and it can certainly advise the commander. But the moral weight of taking a life, that must always rest on human shoulders.
So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. As AI continues to evolve and operate at speeds vastly beyond our biological limits, can we truly guarantee that the human remains in the loop? Will the immense pressure of hypervelocity combat eventually force us to hand over the trigger entirely? It's a huge question, and it's one that will absolutely define the future of global security. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep thinking, keep questioning, and I will see you next time.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving into a massive structural, geopolitical, and economic shift. We're talking about the evolution of India's defense manufacturing capabilities. Specifically, we're going to focus on a really monumental initiative known as the Defense Industrial Corridors. It's a move that's literally redefining national security and economic self-reliance on a global scale.
Now, to really wrap your head around the sheer scale of this turnaround, we have to look at the historical reality. For decades, India actually held a pretty undesirable title, being one of the world's largest importers of military hardware. They relied heavily on foreign nations just for their fundamental security needs. But today, the vision is a totally determined pivot towards Atmanirbhar Bharat, a completely self-reliant India. It's a massive strategic shift from dependency to total domestic capability.
So here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the shift from importer to exporter, then define what these defense industrial corridors actually are and look at them in action. After that, we'll examine the roadblocks to self-reliance, outline the path forward, and finally, look at the ultimate goal of achieving strategic autonomy. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. From importer to exporter, the strategic pivot.
If you look at the era before 2018, it was characterized by this overwhelmingly high dependence on foreign arms. But the real catalyst for change arrived during the 2018-2019 union budgets, when the government officially announced the creation of dedicated defense industrial corridors. This was absolutely crucial, you know? It provided the legal and financial bedrock that actually set the wheels in motion. It took an abstract idea and turned it into actionable policy, allowing the nation to actively build the domestic ecosystem we're seeing today.
Which brings us to Part 2, defining defense industrial corridors. What exactly are they?
You see, a defense industrial corridor isn't just a random assortment of factories scattered across the map. It's a highly strategic, mapped-out region designed to cluster different players together. We're talking public sector undertakings, massive private industries, and those absolutely vital micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs. The whole goal is to build a concentrated, indigenous ecosystem that can design, develop, and export world-class military equipment through localized synergy. It's like a giant puzzle where all the pieces are right next to each other.
All right, part 3, the corridors in action. What is happening right now?
Currently, India's strategy banks on two distinct hubs. Up north, you've got the Uttar Pradesh Defense Industrial Corridor, spanning 6 strategic nodes, including Kanpur and Lucknow.
This one deliberately leverages the state's rapidly expanding expressway network for totally seamless logistics. Down south, the Tamil Nadu corridor spans nodes like Chennai and Coimbatore. Its big advantage? It taps right into the region's existing world-class dominance in automobile and precision engineering. This means advanced defense manufacturing can scale up way faster just by utilizing the highly skilled local workforce. To really understand the sheer scale of this, just look at the financial backing. The Uttar Pradesh corridor alone has attracted nearly 40,000 crore rupees in total investment proposals. That's huge. It proves we aren't just talking about theoretical policy here. This is a heavily backed financial undertaking, drawing intense, concrete interest from massive industrial players.
And a prime, real-world example of that capital turning into physical capability is Adani Defense Systems. They've already operationalized a mega 1,500 crore rupee ammunition facility right in Kanpur. And guys, this isn't just a basic factory. It's the largest private sector ammunition hub in all of South Asia. At the same time, over in the Aligarh node, firms like Whirlwind Defense have already started manufacturing small arms. The ecosystem is live, and it's actively producing.
But it's not just small arms. These corridors are targeting critical high-tech aerospace capabilities too. Over in Lucknow, BrahMos Aerospace set up a 300 crore rupee facility specifically for next-generation missiles. And this is super cool. Under the Defense Testing Infrastructure Scheme, a military-grade drone testing facility has been established at the IIT Kanpur campus. This acts as a vital incubator. It lowers the entry barrier for aerospace startups by letting them test advanced drone tech without needing to raise massive independent capital.
Let's move on to part 4, roadblocks to self-reliance. Why is it important to get this right?
Look, building massive industrial hubs from scratch is never perfectly smooth. There are very distinct operational hurdles. First off, you've got bureaucracy and land acquisition friction. Trying to secure contiguous, litigation-free land can severely stall foreign investments. Then, there's the MSME credit crunch. Small businesses often struggle to match the high capital demands of defense production. Without robust financial support, these corridors risk being entirely dominated by huge conglomerates, which completely starves the vital lower tiers of the supply chain. But honestly, there is an even bigger risk to this whole project.
And that risk is the assembly hub trap. The true goal of these corridors is complete indigenization, actually transferring foundational technologies and building them from scratch locally. The trap happens when domestic entities just import foreign subcomponents, assemble them locally, and slap a Made in India sticker on the box. That completely skews the production data and totally defeats the purpose, leaving the nation still fundamentally reliant on foreign core tech.
So, how do we fix this? That's part 5, the path forward. What should be done? Securing the future of these corridors requires an actionable blueprint, and it comes down to 3 steps. Step 1. We must build anchor supplier ecosystems. Massive defense anchors like BrahMos have to actively nurture localized MSME supply chains to build resilient networks. Step 2. Ensure synergy with academia. Creating direct pipelines between premier institutions and defense nodes means deep academic R&D translates directly into field-ready tech. And finally, Step 3. Streamline single-window clearances. You have to guarantee rapid industrial, environmental, and explosive licensing to effectively cut the red tape that stalls all that critical investment.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 6, Achieving Strategic Autonomy. What is the conclusion?
Well, to prove that this transition from a net importer to a global defense exporter is actually working, we just need to look at the data. India's defense exports recently hit an all-time high record figure of over 38,000 crore rupees. The strategy is paying dividends, for sure. The domestic ecosystem isn't just beginning to supply its own armed forces, it's successfully competing on the highly competitive global market.
The overarching philosophy of this whole shift is probably best summarized by this idea. Defense industrial corridors are not just manufacturing projects. They are the pillars of India's strategic autonomy. Economics and manufacturing, they're just the vehicles driving the transition. The ultimate destination is total national security and self-determination on the global stage.
So as India rapidly expands these hubs, streamlines its bureaucracy, and actively fights off that assembly hub trap, we're left with a really critical question to think about. Will these corridors successfully forge the weapons of future wars entirely on home soil? It's a monumental challenge, absolutely, but the foundation is undeniably poured. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep a close watch on how these critical corridors evolve in the coming years. Catch you next time.
Welcome to this explainer. You know, when we look up at the night sky, we generally tend to think of space as this peaceful, starry frontier, right? a quiet place for astronauts, science, and exploration. But the reality up there, it is undergoing a massive, high-stakes shift right at this very second. It's no longer just a scientific playground. Space has literally evolved into the ultimate high ground, a highly contested domain where national security and sovereignty are being actively redefined. Which brings us to the core, what is it focus of our explainer today? Is space the next battlefield? Are we actually looking at a future where global conflicts are decided not just on land, at sea, or in the air, but way up in orbit? To understand the sheer gravity of this geopolitical shift, we need to look closely at exactly how our orbital environment is being utilized, protected, and, well, threatened.
Okay, let's dive right in. We're going to break this massive topic down into 5 clear sections today. The fourth warfare domain, militarization versus weaponization, India and global space forces, the Kessler syndrome risk, and securing our orbital future. Section 1, the fourth warfare domain, moving from peace to conflict.
First off, we need to completely shatter that old illusion that space is purely a scientific sanctuary. How did it start, and how did we get here? Back in 1967, the world came together and signed the Outer Space Treaty. The explicit goal there was to define space as a peaceful, scientific frontier for all of humanity. Nice idea, right? But fast forward through the decades, and that optimistic vision has collided hard with modern geopolitical realities. By 2019, we saw nations like India demonstrating kinetic anti-satellite or ASAT capabilities via Mission Shakti. Now, in the 21st century, space isn't just an observation deck anymore. It has formally evolved into the fourth domain of warfare.
Moving to Section 2, militarization versus weaponization. A critical distinction.
People throw these two terms around interchangeably all the time, but strategically, they are vastly different. Let's establish exactly what space militarization actually means. It refers to the deployment of space-based assets specifically for defense operations. We're talking military communication networks, reconnaissance satellites that keep a close eye on troop movements, and early warning systems for ballistic missiles. Militarization isn't some futuristic sci-fi concept. It is an active, existing part of how modern national defense operates every single day.
So, here's the crucial point. On one side of the coin, militarization offers an incredible opportunity. It acts like a strategic shield. Satellite constellations give nations real-time battlefield awareness, precise GPS, and unjammable comms. But flip that coin, and you have the immense threat of active weaponization. The danger spikes exponentially when a nation crosses that line from just having a shield to holding a sword.
When you break down the actual technical hardware, you see the massive difference. On the militarization side, you have passive assets like comms, recon, GPS, and early warning systems. They observe, coordinate, and protect. But on the weaponization side, you've got kinetic ASATs designed to physically smash into satellites, directed energy lasers meant to fry sensitive components, and even orbital bombardment systems. It is literally the leap from simply watching space to actively turning it into a combat zone.
And honestly, that leap from militarization to weaponization is absolutely terrifying. Think about it for a second. If a single targeted strike takes out an early warning satellite, you effectively blind a nuclear-armed nation. In the fog of war, a blinded nation is probably going to assume the absolute worst, leading to immediate, catastrophic miscalculations. The stakes literally do not get any higher than this.
Section 3, Global Space Forces and India's Changing Stance.
So what's happening right now on the global stage? And specifically, what is India's stand in this rapidly changing matrix? To understand India's position, we really have to zero in on one pivotal year, 2019. That was the year the geopolitical landscape and orbit fundamentally shifted for the country.
In 2019, India launched Mission Shakti. This was a highly complex operation where they successfully demonstrated kinetic ASAT capability by actually destroying a live satellite in low Earth orbit, or LEO. With that one successful test, India officially joined a very exclusive club, stepping into the ranks of the US, Russia, and China as nations with proven anti-satellite capabilities. But it didn't stop at testing a weapon. They reorganized their entire defense structure, creating the Defense Space Agency to formalize their orbital strategies. What we're seeing is that this is no longer just a thought experiment. The creation of dedicated military branches like the US Space Force and India's Defense Space Agency proves that major global powers are actively and formally preparing to defend their orbital sovereignty. Defending space is now an active, heavily funded reality.
Section 4, the Kessler syndrome risk, the ultimate domino effect.
Now, you might be wondering, why does this matter to us down on the ground? Well, if space warfare breaks out, it won't just be an issue for generals. It's going to radically alter civilian life. And the reason for that is a terrifying concept known as the Kessler syndrome. If nations start utilizing kinetic ASAT weapons, the unchecked destruction of satellites is going to create millions of pieces of high-velocity space debris. Because everything up in orbit is moving at thousands of miles per hour, even a tiny little fragment of a destroyed satellite becomes a deadly projectile, risking a catastrophic domino effect.
Let's walk through exactly how this nightmare builds. Step 1, a single satellite is destroyed in a conflict. Step 2, that explosion creates a massive cloud of high-velocity debris that shreds right through neighboring satellites, which in turn explode, creating even more debris. It's a runaway chain reaction. Step 3, our critical orbits are rendered completely unusable. To put that into perspective, we're talking no GPS, no weather forecasting, disrupted banking, and collapsed civilian communication networks worldwide, the whole shebang.
Finally, Section 5, securing our orbital future and the challenges ahead. So, what should be done? And what's currently stopping us from maintaining peace in the orbital high ground? The reality is, we're facing some massive bottlenecks. First and foremost, current international laws, like that 1967 treaty we mentioned earlier, are effectively toothless against modern threats. We desperately lack robust global regulation. Second, we're seeing a huge rise in gray zone warfare. Nations aren't always just blowing up satellites. Sometimes they're using cyberjamming to disable them without firing a single shot. Or they're using ground-based lasers to temporarily blind a satellite's sensors. It's highly disruptive, incredibly dangerous, and falls right through the loopholes of existing international law.
Bringing this explainer full circle, the reality of our situation really comes down to a quote from our source material that hits the nail on the head. Space has evolved into the ultimate high ground and the fourth domain of warfare. We've completely moved away from peaceful exploration to active militarization, and right now, we are teetering right on the edge of full-blown weaponization.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. As global powers formalize their space forces and build out their strategic shields, we have to ask, will space remain a scientific frontier that unites humanity, or will a single miscalculation in the orbital high ground become our ultimate downfall? It's a very fragile future, and the actions taken by nations today will absolutely define the safety of our world tomorrow. Thanks for diving into this explainer with me. Keep your eyes on the skies and never stop learning.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly fascinating, a highly detailed strategic analysis document that outlines a massive, paradigm-shifting scenario known as Operation Sindoor. Now, the source text we're unpacking today lays out a monumental shift in national security doctrine. It details a hypothetical yet meticulously modeled military and diplomatic response by India set in May 2025. It is a wildly compelling look into what we call comprehensive national power. I'm honestly super thrilled to guide you through the text's incredibly detailed projections today. Okay, let's dive right into this. Think about it for a second. How exactly does a nation permanently redraw its security red lines? The document we're looking at doesn't just theorize about, small tactical tweaks. It outlines a complete, ground-up overhaul of how a nation responds to cross-border threats. We're talking about a scenario where traditional strategic restraint is completely thrown out the window, replaced by a multidimensional, absolutely overwhelming response. We're going to explore exactly how the military and diplomatic landscape is theorized to shift so drastically.
So, here's our roadmap for the analysis. We'll cover 1. The Pahalgam Catalyst. 2. Executing Operation Sindoor. 3. Tri-Service Synergy. 4. The Weaponization of Water. 5. A New Strategic Doctrine. And finally, 6. Modern Warfare Lessons. Let's jump in.
Section 1. The Pahalgam Catalyst.
To really grasp this massive strategic shift, we've got to look at where the document anchors everything. It all starts on a very specific, somber timeline, April 22nd, 2025. This is when a brutal terrorist attack in Pahalgam, Jammu and Kashmir, tragically claims the lives of 26 innocent civilians. Fast forward to May 2025, just a few weeks later, and the text states that India completely abandons its traditional posture of strategic restraint. This wasn't some long, drawn-out geopolitical debate, The source outlines a rapid, decisive pivot that culminates in the execution of Operation Sindoor that very same month. This timeline really sets the stage for a response that's conceived not just as a quick tactical retaliation, but as a full-blown punitive campaign.
Section 2. Executing Operation Sindoor.
All right, now the text moves straight into tactical execution, and the pacing here gets incredibly fast. 23 minutes. The source explicitly highlights this astonishing time frame. It states that the primary mission, which involved cross-border precision strikes deep into Pakistan's heartland, specifically targeting infrastructure in the Punjab province and Bahawalpur, was executed by the Indian Air Force in exactly 23 minutes. The text points out that this absolutely shattered long-held assumptions of nuclear immunity. It proved that deeply penetrative strikes could be carried out with blistering speed way before any conventional escalation could even take hold.
So you might be wondering, how on earth was this 23-minute window achieved? Well, the source breaks down the specific mix of imported and indigenous kinetic strike technology they used. We're talking Rafale fighter jets armed with Scout missiles and Hammer smart bombs utilized specifically to bypass and jam Chinese-supplied air defense networks. But the text also heavily emphasizes the defensive shield. When retaliation was attempted via drones and loitering munitions, India deployed a layered ground-based air defense grid. This included the indigenous Akash missile system alongside advanced counter-UAS technologies. According to the document, this combination just bluntly neutralized the aerial assault. Zero loss of Indian military assets.
Looking at the kinetic results of this operation, they're stated quite impartially in the document. The initial waves successfully eliminated 9 major terror launch pads located in Pakistan and POJOK. The text details that this precision strike neutralized over 100 terrorists, which included high-profile commanders from groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and Hizbul Mujahideen. The source uses this exact data to really underscore the sheer surgical precision of the operation. It highlights the total dismantling of targeted terror infrastructure within that incredibly tight operational window.
Section 3. Tri-Service Synergy.
And this brilliantly illustrates that Operation Sindoor wasn't just a solo Air Force mission. It served as the ultimate testing ground for joint military doctrine. The source provides a super clear matrix of how different branches coordinated flawlessly. While the Air Force and Army handled the deep kinetic strikes and the layered air defense mesh, the Navy was simultaneously forward deploying a full carrier battle group near the Makran coast, basically imposing an effective maritime blockade. On top of that, the Borders Security Force and Coast Guard were actively neutralizing infiltrators in Samba and shielding the coastal zones. The text argues that this seamless net-centric coordination strongly validated India's decade-long budgetary investments in Atmanirbhar, or self-reliant defense tech.
Section 4. The Weaponization of Water.
Now, let's intentionally slow our pace down a bit here, because while those kinetic strikes were lightning fast, the text argues that the true geopolitical earthquake came from diplomacy, anchored by this incredibly stark quote: "Blood and water cannot flow together." According to the analysis, Operation Sindoor involved a historic, non-kinetic move where India announced the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty. This quote represents a massive ideological and policy shift, taking the battlefield out of the skies and moving it directly into the realm of vital natural resources.
And the text explains exactly why this matters so much. By holding the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance, the document states that India asserts its right to build vital reservoirs and hydro projects on the western Jhelum and Chenab rivers. The analysis points out that this action is explicitly designed to choke a fragile, agriculture-dependent economy. What you should really take away from this is the sheer scale of economic leverage described here. The source highlights this as a literal masterclass in comprehensive national power, inflicting severe, long-lasting economic consequences without firing a single extra shot.
Section 5. A New Strategic Doctrine. So, what's the big picture when you combine 23-minute precision strikes with the weaponization of vital water resources? Well, the source text argues it establishes an absolute new message to the global community, clearly outlining India's new stand. On one side, the document outlines the old doctrine, localized strikes strictly along the line of control, always tempered by traditional strategic restraint. But then look at the new doctrine established by Operation Sindoor: deep penetrative strikes and a multi-dimensional response that is completely unhindered by geographic boundaries. The text emphasizes that this shift effectively decoupled the conflict from the traditional Kashmir narrative. Instead, it reframed the nation's posture strictly through the absolute lens of counterterrorism. The new red line is crystal clear. State-sponsored terrorism will be met with overwhelming, multi-domain force.
Section 6. Modern Warfare Lessons. To wrap up its analysis and to really outline what must be done moving forward, the source document extracts the core takeaways for future defense readiness. The text boils down the requirements for modern victory into these 3 strict mandates. First up, technological superiority. The reality is, you just cannot bypass modern defense networks without cutting-edge, self-reliant tech. Second, flawless inter-service jointness. The Air Force, Navy, and ground forces literally have to operate on a single, synchronized, net-centric grid. And third, unwavering strategic clarity. You need the political and military will to execute both kinetic strikes and massive economic maneuvers at the exact same time. The source basically argues that sovereignty is no longer protected by passive defense, but by the absolute readiness to deliver this exact kind of crushing, multidimensional response.
Which brings us to a highly provocative question, inspired directly by the source text's conclusions. As warfare decisively expands beyond the traditional battlefield and spills over into the realms of severe economic leverage and vital resources like water, where exactly is the global community going to draw the next strategic red line? The analysis of Operation Sindoor shows us a scenario where the boundaries of conflict are entirely redefined. And it really leaves us to wonder how international law and global diplomacy will adapt to a world where a nation's comprehensive power can freeze a treaty and alter the flow of rivers just to ensure its security. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing, keep asking the hard questions, and I'll see you all next time.
Welcome to the Explainer. Ever wonder what's driving the next great global resource rush? Well, spoiler alert. It's not happening deep underground. It's happening inside spotless, billion-dollar clean rooms. Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we're unpacking a monumental, game-changing shift, India's semiconductor mission. It's a strategic chess move that has the potential to completely reshape the global technology ecosystem as we know it. People keep saying silicon chips are the oil of the 21st century. And honestly, they're right. Think about it for a second. Literally every single day, your life depends entirely on these microscopic marvels. They are the beating heart of your smartphone. They're the brain guiding modern electric vehicles. They're even the critical life-or-death components inside advanced cruise missiles and fighter jet radars. Without semiconductors, the modern world just simply stops spinning. And that is exactly why securing their production isn't just about business anymore. It's absolutely a matter of national survival and global power. To really wrap our heads around India's trillion-dollar strategic play, we've got a quick roadmap today. We'll start with the new 21st century oil, move into the geopolitical flashpoint, look at what is happening now, hit some roadblocks and brain drains, figure out exactly what should be done, and finally, analyze the strategic chess move at the end of it all.
All right, part 1, the new 21st century oil, or the trillion-dollar ambition. So what exactly is the India Semiconductor Mission, or ISM? Essentially, it is a comprehensive ambition by the Indian government to build a robust, end-to-end domestic ecosystem. We're not just talking about assembling cheap parts here. No, this is a drive for full-scale domestic fabrication, intricate chip design, and highly advanced packaging. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer scale of the commitment, a staggering 76,000 crore rupee initial outlay. That isn't just a gentle nudge to the market, it's a massive financial foundation, meant to signal to the entire world that India is completely serious about becoming a semiconductor powerhouse. It's the kind of heavy-hitting capital you need to kickstart a deeply complex industry right from the ground up. Moving to part 2, the geopolitical flashpoint and the quest for sovereignty through silicon. So, you might be asking, how did this whole global race even start? And why is India taking such a firm stand right now? Well, the global vulnerability is just glaringly obvious. Right now, global chip supply chains are precariously concentrated in really just a couple of places, primarily Taiwan and South Korea. And that heavy reliance, it's a massive geopolitical flashpoint. A single regional conflict or a natural disaster in the Pacific could literally freeze global tech manufacturing overnight. India's goal here is to aggressively build domestic fabs to shield itself from those exact kinds of global supply shocks. It's all about achieving absolute sovereignty through silicon. But, it's not just about national defense and shielding the supply chain. It's also about a tremendous economic opportunity. The global semiconductor market is absolutely racing toward $1 trillion. Trillion with a T. For India, the semiconductor mission acts as this vital economic multiplier. It's about capturing a massive slice of that pie, generating highly skilled, high-tech employment, and anchoring advanced electronics manufacturing firmly within its own borders. Which brings us to part 3. What is happening now? Boots on the ground. It's easy to just announce a massive fund, but we are actually seeing rapid-fire boots-on-the-ground reality here under ISM 2.0. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what I mean. Look at Micron Technology. They are setting up a cutting-edge advanced packaging facility right now in Sanand, Gujarat. We've got official approvals for mega fabrication plants for Tata Electronics in Dholera and for CG Power. But wait, it's not just foreign partnerships. Check this out.
CDAC has successfully developed the DHRU-64. That's a fully indigenous 64-bit microprocessor designed specifically for 5G infrastructure and industrial automation. It proves that India's chip design maturity isn't some future dream. It is already a reality.
Let's slow things down a bit for part 4. Roadblocks and brain drains, the reality check.
Because let's be real, building a semiconductor empire is notoriously one of the hardest industrial challenges in human history, and there are severe hurdles in the way. Establishing a fab isn't like throwing up a standard warehouse. We're talking about needing billions of gallons of ultra-pure water. And the power supply? It doesn't just need to be uninterrupted, it has to be entirely fluctuation-free. Just a millisecond power blip can completely ruin millions of dollars worth of incredibly delicate silicon wafers. So managing these intense, uncompromising resource needs in regions that are already water-stressed is a frankly monumental hurdle.
And then, of course, there's the human element, which presents a massive, fascinating paradox. India possesses absolutely brilliant talent. In fact, Indian engineers make up 20% of the entire world's chip design workforce. That is a huge slice of the global talent pie. Yet here's the catch. A vast majority of them are working for foreign multinationals. They're experiencing a major brain drain as they create intellectual property for other nations. The immense challenge isn't creating the talent. They clearly have that. It's figuring out how to reorient that massive talent pool toward domestic IP creation.
So, part 5. What should be done? Building the ecosystem. How on earth do we overcome these massive physical roadblocks and keep all that brilliant talent at home? Let's move to and see how this builds out logically. Step 1. India absolutely has to manage those intense resource bottlenecks through innovative, dedicated infrastructure for water and power. You simply can't skip that. Step 2. The government needs to expand the fiscal support of ISM 2.0 even further, pushing the boundary into advanced 3D packaging and bleeding-edge sub-5 nanometer nodes. And step 3, to solve that talent paradox we just talked about, there need to be deep structural partnerships with academic hubs like the IITs to foster specialized talent and incentivize them to build right at home.
Finally, part 6, the strategic chess move, the endgame.
When we bring all of this together, India's overarching play in the geopolitical arena becomes crystal clear. The India semiconductor mission is not merely a domestic manufacturing policy. No, it's a highly calculated long-term strategic chess move. So the crucial point is that this mission is designed to secure a trusted, resilient place in the global technology supply chain. India doesn't just want to be a participant on the sidelines anymore. It intends to establish itself as an indispensable, trusted global pillar in a world that desperately needs supply chain diversity.
So, with the board set, the billions of rupees committed, the mega fabs breaking ground, and the geopolitical stakes higher than ever before, will India successfully secure its place as the world's most trusted technological pillar? It's a massive endeavor with absolutely incredible implications for the global economy, and you can bet we will be watching every single move. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. Keep questioning and keep learning. Welcome to This Explainer. You know, when most of us think about water, we probably just think about turning on a tap, right? It's a basic, everyday convenience. But today, we are going to unpack how this incredibly simple resource is rapidly evolving from a standard environmental concern into a matter of absolute national survival and strategy. We're looking at India's water security. This is a deeply complex subject, covering everything from what it actually is, how the crisis started, to what is happening right now with its massive geopolitical and domestic implications. Our goal today is to look at the data, the policies, and the realities on the ground to understand exactly what is at stake.
All right, let's dive right into our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting 6 key areas: a national security threat, origins of the crisis, flashpoints and domestic disputes, India's current initiatives, solutions for the future, and finally, the final verdict. Let's get into it.
Section 1. A national security threat. Redefining water.
Okay, consider this. India is currently trying to support nearly 18% of the entire global human population. To put that into perspective, that is literally like sustaining everyone in the Americas and Europe combined. But here's the catch. They have to do it relying on just 4% of the world's renewable water resources. 4%. That massive, staggering disproportion is the baseline reality we absolutely have to keep in mind throughout this entire explainer. It completely changes how a nation has to operate. Because of that extreme imbalance between population size and available resources, water just can't be managed as some sort of ecological afterthought anymore. The stakes for the entire country have fundamentally altered. We need to understand why this matters so much. A lack of water doesn't just mean a dry tap at home. We're talking about collapsing agricultural sectors, halted industries, and severe food shortages. When you have so many people relying on such a razor-thin slice of a critical resource, its preservation basically becomes synonymous with the preservation of the state itself.
Moving on to Section 2, Origins of the Crisis, the Roots of Scarcity.
So beyond just the sheer population density we looked at a moment ago, there are really two twin macro forces at play here. First up, accelerating climate change is totally disrupting historical weather patterns, making monsoon seasons way less predictable and natural replenishment highly volatile. Second, rapid urbanization is drawing massive populations into concentrated urban centers, placing an unprecedented strain on localized water systems that, honestly, were never designed to handle that kind of intense demand. To ground this in reality, just think about major Indian metropolitans that have recently faced terrifying day zero scenarios, like Chennai back in 2019, where city reservoirs effectively ran dry. These forces are draining historical reserves at absolute record speeds.
But human policy has heavily compounded those natural pressures too. Well-meaning agricultural subsidies have inadvertently created a catastrophic ecological misuse. For instance, providing free or heavily subsidized electricity has a direct, devastating consequence. It allows for reckless, essentially uncontrolled pumping of groundwater. Because the power to pump the water is practically free, there's absolutely zero economic disincentive to conserve it. What happens? We see the farming of highly water-intensive crops, like rice and sugarcane, in regions that are naturally arid. It is a completely unsustainable drain on underground aquifers.
And adding to that heavy agricultural strain is industrial pollution. It's not just about how much water is being pulled out of the ground, it's about what is being done to the water that remains on the surface. Dumping untreated chemical effluents directly into vital river lifelines, specifically the Ganga and the Yamuna, is literally poisoning the resource. When vital rivers are poisoned, it doesn't just harm wildlife. It fundamentally shrinks that already tiny 4% pool of water that over 1 billion people desperately rely on to survive.
Let's look at Section 3, Flashpoints and Domestic Disputes, the Current Crisis.
Right now, we are actually watching this crisis unfold on two massive, distinct fronts. Internationally, India shares its major river systems, which requires constant diplomatic vigilance, particularly concerning the Indus Waters Treaty in the west and dam developments to the north and east. But domestically, the threat is just as intense. Depleting groundwater tables across critical agricultural breadbaskets like Punjab and Haryana risk severe food insecurity. At the exact same time, we're seeing interstate disputes like the highly publicized Calvary water dispute, which actively strain internal federal stability.
Let's zoom in on that international front for a second, specifically the concept of hydropolitics. Maintaining an objective, observational stance here, it is wild to see how infrastructure literally shapes geopolitics. China's construction of megadams on the upper reaches of the Brahmaputra, known over there as the Yarlung Po, gives Beijing massive mechanical leverage over the water. This capability means a neighboring nation could potentially trigger sudden floods or even artificial droughts downstream in India's northeast, just depending on how they manage the water release. It is a textbook example of water being used as a strategic tool.
All right, on to Section 4, India's current initiatives, the state's response.
So the state is currently deploying a really deliberate, two-pronged attack to address these vulnerabilities. On the macro level, you've got the Jal Jeevan Mission. This is a massive nationwide push to provide functional tap water connections to over 75% of rural households. The main goal here? Significantly improving basic public health and rural productivity. But paired with that, down on the micro level, is the Amrit Sarovar Mission. This is an excellent hyper-local initiative tasked with constructing or rejuvenating exactly 75 water bodies in every single district across India. It's a highly targeted effort to naturally recharge those depleting ground aquifers we were talking about earlier.
Now for Section 5, Solutions for the Future. What should be done?
According to the analysis, there are 3 systemic pivots that are practically non-negotiable for survival at this point. Step 1, agriculture fundamentally has to change how it operates by pivoting toward large-scale micro-irrigation, meaning drip and sprinkler farming rather than just flooding the fields. Step 2, industrial pollution has to be stopped at the source through the strict enforcement of zero liquid discharge norms. That basically means no untreated wastewater ever reaches a river.
And step 3, water conservation simply cannot just be a government job. It has to be adopted as a massive citizen-led movement. Especially when it comes to rainwater harvesting, this is where ordinary citizens and local communities come in. Shifting that responsibility from the bureaucratic level down to the individual level ensures every single drop is maximized before it's lost. Finally, Section 6, the final verdict. My conclusion. You know, we spend so much time discussing energy security in the world today, but water is infinitely more fundamental. We can find alternatives to oil, right? But there is absolutely no alternative to water. Securing this resource is a complete prerequisite for building a self-reliant nation. Ultimately, the next global and regional conflicts won't be fought over oil. They're going to be fought over water. So I want to leave you with this provocative question to ponder. Because understanding the sheer scale of this threat, from that staggering 4% resource gap to the intense complexities of hydropolitics, well, that's really only the first step. The real work lies in the solutions. What changes must we embrace today to secure a self-reliant blue future? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you. A nation's human capital is its greatest asset. You know, that's a pretty powerful thought, isn't it? Before we even start looking at new buildings, infrastructure, or shiny technology, we absolutely have to look at the people. Because if you want to build a nation's future, well, you have to build its minds first. And that is exactly what we're focusing on today. Welcome back, Focus learners. Today's explainer is all about India's monumental National Education Policy, or NEP 2020. We're going to look at how this document isn't just a policy, it serves as a massive structural blueprint for real transformation. It's not just a few minor tweaks to a syllabus, right? It's about architecting a highly skilled, fully developed nation, a Viksit Bharat. Okay, let's dive into this. To completely demystify this massive policy shift, here is our roadmap for today. Number 1, what is NEP 2020? 2, the pillars of the policy. 3, what is happening now? 4, the hurdles we face. 5, what should be done? And finally, 6, achieving a Viksit Bharat. Section 1, what is NEP 2020? Replacing the old guard. So how did this all start? Well, for decades, India basically operated on an education framework that was established way back in 1986. I mean, just think about what the world looked like in 1986 compared to today. That old system heavily relied on rote learning, basically memorizing chunks of information just to pass your exams. It became incredibly outdated. Then along comes 2020, where the NEP is introduced as a totally modern, skill-oriented blueprint. It's a seriously long overdue update designed to actually prepare students for the fast-paced realities of the 21st century. The contrast here is just stark. On one side, we've got the old rote learning system. This was defined by memorization and very rigid silos. You were either an art student or a science student, and never the twain shall meet. On the other side, we have the incredible new NEP 2020 vision, a dynamic, skill-oriented ecosystem. It is holistic, it is modern, and above all, it's incredibly flexible. Section 2, Pillars of the Policy, the Structural Foundation. So the old 10+2 school system, that is completely gone. In its place is this brand new 5+3+3+4 structure. Now, what's really fascinating here is that very first step, the foundational stage. It now systematically begins at age 3 with Early Childhood Care and Education, or ECCE. Instead of kind of ignoring those absolutely crucial early years, the policy ensures that cognitive development is prioritized from a much younger age, which builds a way stronger foundation for everything that follows. But you see, the structure isn't just about changing age brackets. It's about what you can actually learn. The new mandate is literally to break down the silos. Remember those rigid streams we just talked about? Well, under NEP 2020's multidisciplinary approach, a student doesn't have to choose between their totally varied passions. You can literally study quantum physics alongside classical music. It's like a giant puzzle where you get to pick the pieces, creating a much more well-rounded, innovative thinker. And this brilliantly illustrates the next core concept, the Academic Bank of Credits, or ABC. If you're out there mixing subjects and exploring different paths, you need a system that actually tracks that, right? The ABC is a highly flexible digital mechanism that stores your academic credits. What this means in practice is that you have multiple entry and exit options in higher education. So if you need to pause your degree for whatever reason, your credits are completely safe in the bank until you return. That is unprecedented flexibility for the learner. And it's not just purely academic subjects either. NEP 2020 introduces vocational integration starting all the way down in Class 6. We're talking about hands-on skills here, coding, carpentry, digital tools. Why does this matter? Because introducing these skills early on directly tackles the deep-seated social stigma surrounding vocational labor. It teaches every single student the dignity and the absolute necessity of working with your hands as well as your mind. It's genuinely awe-inspiring to think about the sheer scale of this cultural shift. Section 3. What is happening now? Implementation in action. The great news is we're already seeing tangible, exciting successes on the ground. First off, the government is upgrading thousands of schools into PM Shri schools. Think of these as model laboratories spread across the country, actively demonstrating what tech-driven experiential learning actually looks like in practice. Second, there's a massive push for internationalization. Over in India's Gift City, top-tier foreign universities, places like Deakin and Wollongong, are establishing campuses right now. This is huge. It actively prevents domestic brain drain and essentially forces domestic academic benchmarks to rise up to meet global standards.
Section 4. The hurdles we face. Stumbling blocks.
Of course, a project this massive has its challenges. We're currently facing 3 main operational bottlenecks. First up, the digital and infrastructure divide. The policy calls for high-tech experiential toolkits and smart classrooms, but let's be real, funding and implementing these in under-resourced rural schools is a very steep practical challenge. Second, teacher upskilling. We're asking millions of teachers to completely abandon the conventional textbook rote methods they've used for decades. Actually, it's more like a total paradigm shift for them, and that requires massive, continuous investment in training. And third, linguistic friction. The policy rightly identifies that learning in a mother tongue is cognitively beneficial for primary students. However, the logistics of translating curricula and managing students who migrate between states with totally different languages, that is incredibly complex.
Section 5. What should be done? The financial climax. So, what does this all mean for the future? Well, the crucial point boils down to one simple number: 6%. The NEP 2020 is a profoundly visionary document, absolutely. But to overcome those infrastructure deficits and the massive training needs we just discussed, it requires cold, hard capital. The center and the states have to collaborate heavily to raise education spending toward that targeted 6% of the GDP. Because without that financial commitment, the blueprint just stays a blueprint. Section 6. Achieving a Viksit Bharat, the final edifice. So, what should you take away from all this? Ultimately, the goal of this entire policy is to build a very specific kind of human capital. By shifting away from rote memorization and moving toward flexible, multidisciplinary, and vocational learning, India is aiming to cultivate a highly creative generation and a highly skilled workforce, who are also deeply rooted as citizens. If executed correctly, the NEP 2020 won't just be an education policy. It will serve as the definitive catalyst for achieving a fully developed India. Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought. The structural blueprint for a 21st century education ecosystem is officially ready. The policies are written, the model schools are opening, and the vision is incredibly clear. But as we've seen, success hinges entirely on execution right at the grassroots level. The blueprint is ready, but can we actually build it? I want you to think about what it will take in your own communities to make this a reality. Thank you for joining me on this Explainer Focused Learners. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time. Welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because honestly, we're tackling one of the most fascinating and consequential topics in global geopolitics right now. We're looking at India's role in the Indo-Pacific. Seriously, if you glance at a world map today, the Indo-Pacific isn't just some geographical region. It's the absolute global center of gravity, geopolitically, economically, you name it. And we're going to explore how India, sitting right there at the strategic crossroads of the Indian Ocean, is undergoing this massive transformation. We'll look at what this region actually is, how India's stance started, what's happening right now, and why this is just so incredibly important for the entire world. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap. First, we'll establish exactly why the Indo-Pacific is the global center of gravity. Second, we'll unpack India's strategic shift. Third, we'll look at actual action in the Indo-Pacific. Fourth, the massive balancing act involved. And finally, securing the future. We're keeping this totally focused, leaving out the dense military jargon, and getting straight to the mechanics.
So, Section 1, the global center of gravity.
Before we can really understand India's role, we have to ask a pretty basic question. Why exactly does this specific region command the world's attention? Well, consider the sheer scale of the economic stakes here. The Indo-Pacific region accounts for a staggering 60% of the entire global GDP.
Think about that for a second. That is way more than half of the world's total economic output being generated in this single vast theater. The rest of the world combined only makes up 40%. So when we talk about global prosperity, future economic growth, or the engines driving international markets, we're literally talking about the Indo-Pacific. This is where the world's wealth is increasingly concentrated.
And it's not just about what's produced there. It's about how it moves. 50%. Half of all global maritime trade passes right through these waters. So whether you live in New Delhi, New York, or Nairobi, this is exactly why you should care. This region is the beating heart of global supply chains. If the waters here are secure and open, boom, global trade flows smoothly. But if they get disrupted, the entire global economy feels the shockwave almost instantly. That's why the security and stability of the Indo-Pacific is an absolute, urgent priority for everybody.
Moving on to Section 2, India's strategic shift. With so much at stake, how has India's posture fundamentally evolved? Well, historically, India operated as a fairly passive regional balancing power, mostly focused inward or just dealing with immediate border concerns. Today, however, it's like an awakening giant. India is stepping up as a proactive net security provider. They're actively shaping the security environment and taking on the heavy responsibility of keeping these critical waters safe for everyone.
This whole proactive stance is guided by a framework called SAGAR. And SAGAR actually translates to ocean in Hindi. But here it stands for Security and Growth for All in the Region. It's a highly cooperative blueprint. It basically focuses on three main things: maritime capacity building, which means helping neighbors develop their own capabilities; disaster relief, so acting as a vital first responder when natural disasters strike; and counter-piracy. So it's not about domination. It's all about collective growth through collective security. But let's be real, there's also a major strategic driver here, particularly in complex areas like the South China Sea. India plays a pivotal role in ensuring that the vital sea lines of communication, often called SLOCs, remain totally free from coercive unilateral hegemony. The main objective is simply to maintain an open, rules-based maritime environment, an environment where no single power can dictate the terms or restrict the flow of that 50% of global trade we just talked about. It's about keeping the global commons open for absolutely everyone. Which brings us to Section 3, Action in the Indo-Pacific. And this brilliantly illustrates how India is translating its big picture vision into concrete moves on the global chessboard right now. Take the Quad, for example. That's the strategic dialogue between India, the US, Japan, and Australia. Now, this isn't just some diplomatic talking shop where politicians smile and take photos. The Quad framework is actually laser-focused on delivering tangible public goods to the region. We're talking critical vaccine distribution during global health crises, advancing maritime domain awareness so smaller nations can actually monitor their own waters, and building climate resilience. Basically, India is working alongside major powers to provide practical, real-world solutions. To back all this up, India has been incredibly busy signing reciprocal military logistics sharing pacts with key partner nations, places like the US, Japan, Australia, and France. A really prime example of this is LMOA with the United States. And the result of these agreements? Extended naval reach. Basically, Indian naval ships can now refuel, repair, and resupply at the bases of these partner countries. By sharing logistics, the Indian Navy doesn't have to keep rushing back home to refuel. It can sustain operations across the vast Indo-Pacific theater without skipping a beat. It's a real game changer. Another major tactical move we're seeing is strategic experts. This is a super concrete, real-world example of India actively stepping into that net security provider role. India actually recently delivered the BrahMos supersonic cruise missile system to the Philippines. Now, this isn't just a basic business transaction. It's a calculated strategic maneuver. By providing advanced defense technology, India is directly helping regional partners protect their own maritime boundaries and sovereign interests. It sends a powerful signal about India's commitment to the region's overall defensive architecture. All right, Section 4, the Balancing Act. Okay, so becoming a proactive global power in the world's most dynamic region sounds amazing, right? But it comes with a grand strategic dilemma, a huge reality check. On one side, you have the continental dilemma. India shares active, historically tense land borders at the line of actual control and the line of control. Securing those borders requires immense, immediate resources and manpower. But on the other side, you have the maritime dilemma. Expanding a blue water navy, building aircraft carriers and advanced submarines, requires massive, long-term capital investment. So India is constantly having to balance its finite defense spending between these very immediate land-based threats and its super expensive long-term oceanic ambitions. And externally, the balancing act is highly diplomatic. Over-militarization really risks alienating smaller nations who fear being caught in a superpower crossfire. This is what's known as the delicate concept of ASEAN centrality. You see, the smaller nations of Southeast Asia are absolutely crucial to the Indo-Pacific, but they do not want to be forced to choose sides in some broader superpower rivalry. If India comes in too aggressively, it risks isolating these very partners. Therefore, India's strategic moves have to remain highly collaborative and focused on shared prosperity, rather than just flexing military might.
Finally, Section 5, Securing the Future. So we've seen the strategy, we've looked at the concrete actions, and we've unpacked the balancing act. Looking at the board exactly as it stands today, what does India actually need to do next to secure its future as a global power in this theater?
Well, the roadmap really requires 4 specific sustained actions. First, accelerating naval modernization to ensure they have the actual physical hardware to back up their maritime ambitions. Second, expanding physical port partnerships, with strategic locations like Sabang in Indonesia being prime examples. Third, driving robust trade networks to deeply integrate India's economy with the rest of that massive 60% of global GDP we talked about earlier. And fourth, relentlessly ensuring a free, open, and rules-based order. By executing these 4 key points, India secures both its own economic path and really cements its status as an indispensable global power.
And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this explainer. The Indo-Pacific's future is undeniably going to shape India's destiny. But here is the provocative thought I want to leave you with today. As India steps up as a proactive net security provider navigating its complex continental and maritime dilemmas, will India's balancing act ultimately shape the destiny of the world? Given the immense economic and strategic weight of the Indo-Pacific, the decisions being made in New Delhi today are literally going to ripple across global supply chains and international security architectures for decades to come. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a topic that's honestly as fascinating as it is terrifying. We're talking about a massive global threat that is completely invisible, yet it has the raw power to bring entire nations to a grinding halt. You know, when we normally think of warfare, we picture loud, explosive, very visible conflicts. But the landscape of global security, it's fundamentally changed.
Look at it this way. The most devastating weapon in the modern world is completely invisible. Unlike the loud, physical battles of the past that we've all read about in history books, today's most lethal attacks don't start with the roar of artillery. They happen in absolute silence. They execute literally at the speed of light. And as we're going to see throughout this explainer, they can completely cripple a nation's critical infrastructure without a single physical bullet ever being fired.
Section 1, the fifth dimension.
So historically, wars were fought across very tangible physical domains, right? In ancient eras, conflict was strictly on land. Then, during the Age of Sail, it expanded out to the sea. The 20th century took us up to the skies with air combat. And by the late 20th century, we actually added space to the equation. But today we've arrived at a completely new frontier. Cyberspace has officially emerged as the fifth domain, and honestly, it is the most lethal, invisible, and unpredictable battlefield we've ever encountered.
Moving on to Section 2, the asymmetric battlefield.
The contrast here is literally night and day. On one side, conventional warfare is completely bound by physical limitations. You need physical troops, you have to cross actual borders, and you rely on physical munitions like bullets. But cyber warfare throws those rules right out the window. There are 0 physical troops deployed. These operations cross international borders instantly, and a nation's absolute lifelines, like power grids, water supplies, and communication networks, can be completely paralyzed without firing a single weapon.
And this brings us to a really crucial concept: asymmetric advantage. Basically, this happens when a rogue state or even a non-state actor with very limited resources uses malicious software to paralyze a global superpower. Just think about that for a second. You no longer need an economy worth trillions of dollars to threaten a superpower's banking systems, their satellite networks, or their highly classified intelligence databases. A small, organized group with a laptop and a decent internet connection can completely level the playing field against a massive military force.
But here's the real kicker, what experts call the attribution dilemma. If someone fires a missile at you, radar systems can track exactly where it came from in a matter of seconds. But cyber attacks? They are shielded by plausible deniability. Hackers can bounce their attacks through servers all over the globe. So determining the true origin of a state-sponsored hack doesn't take seconds. It takes weeks of painstaking digital forensics. And because you can't immediately prove who attacked you, traditional military deterrence, like the threat of immediate retaliation, is severely complicated.
Now, you might be asking yourself, why is this important to me? It's super easy to think of cyber warfare as just abstract code floating around somewhere in the ether. But before we look at some historical examples, I really want you to consider the real-world stakes here. When digital infrastructure fails, our physical reality breaks down incredibly fast.
Let's dive into Section 3, Real-World Cyber Threats.
When the digital world collides with the physical one, the results can be absolutely catastrophic. Let's look at the Stuxnet worm. This is a classic historical example that basically changed everything. You see, Stuxnet wasn't just designed to snoop around and steal data. It was a highly advanced cyber weapon specifically engineered to cause massive physical destruction. It infiltrated Iranian nuclear facilities and secretly altered the rotor speeds of their nuclear centrifuges until those machines physically tore themselves apart. Invisible code causing catastrophic physical damage. It's wild.
And hey, this threat is a lot closer to home for many nations than we'd probably like to admit. Take the Kudankulam cyber incident in 2019. India's Kudankulam nuclear power plant actually suffered a malware infection on its administrative network. Now, fortunately, this specific infection targeted the administrative side, not the actual reactor controls, but the message was loud and clear. Even the most critical, supposedly secure nuclear infrastructure networks are alarmingly vulnerable to malicious software.
So that's how it started and what we've seen in the recent past. But what is happening right now? Well, the current landscape of cyber threats has evolved, and the way these bad actors are actually getting into systems might surprise you.
Here is the ultimate plot twist in cybersecurity. We all tend to imagine cyber warfare as brilliant, shadowy hackers breaking through incredibly complex software firewalls. But the reality? Only 10% of vulnerabilities actually come from software flaws. A staggering 90% comes directly from human error and a lack of basic digital hygiene. Think about that. The biggest vulnerability in any advanced defense isn't the technology, it's us. It's an internal staff member at a classified military domain simply clicking on a deceptive phishing link in an everyday email. That one single click just opens the front door for the enemy.
Add to that the outright weaponization of ransomware. Hostile nations are getting really smart about this. Instead of directly attacking an adversary and risking that attribution we talked about earlier, they just use criminal syndicates as geopolitical proxies. These criminal groups are routinely hired or encouraged by hostile states to infiltrate systems, extort massive amounts of money, and leak highly sensitive government credentials to the public. It gives the hostile nation the perfect cover of plausible deniability. With these massive global vulnerabilities staring us in the face, we have to ask, how are nations organizing to actually defend themselves? Specifically, what is India's stand against these invisible assaults?
That brings us to Section 4, India's cyber defense. To combat this intense asymmetric threat, India stepped up and established the Defense Cyber Agency, or DCYA. This is a dedicated tri-service command. It was created with one primary, active mission: to proactively mitigate external, state-sponsored cyber threats that are deliberately targeting the armed forces. It really represents a massive, crucial shift towards acknowledging that cyberspace absolutely requires its own dedicated military defense strategy, completely integrated across all branches of service.
But, of course, creating an agency is just one piece of the puzzle, right? The really big question we all face as we look to the future is, what should be done? What is the ultimate path forward to achieve actual, true national security in this new era?
Let's look at Section 5, Winning the Invisible War.
Here is the roadmap for survival. Step 1. We have to rapidly transition from just sitting safely behind reactive firewalls to proactive cyber hunting. We have to seek out threats before they actually strike. Step 2. Enforce indigenous hardware security standards. You simply can't rely on foreign hardware if you want your deepest infrastructure to be genuinely secure. And Step 3. Mandate strict digital protocols across both the civilian and military sectors. Remember that crazy 90% human error statistic? Yeah, strict enforced protocols are the only way we're ever going to fix that digital hygiene problem.
All right, so having explored the evolution, the sneaky tactics, and the necessary solutions for this modern battlefield, what's my conclusion?
I want to leave you with this incredibly sobering, powerful quote directly from our source material today. Losing the cyber war means losing the physical war before it even begins. That hits hard, doesn't it? Cyber resilience is no longer just a back-end IT issue. It is the absolute, unquestionable cornerstone of 21st century national security. Because if your communications and your infrastructure are completely paralyzed digitally,
Will your physical troops and conventional weapons become entirely useless?
Which leads me to one final thought for you to really ponder. We've talked a whole lot about nations, militaries, and critical infrastructure today. But remember that 90% of vulnerabilities come directly from human error. So I have to ask you, in an invisible war where human error is the biggest threat, how secure is your own digital footprint? The front lines of the fifth dimension aren't just in top-secret military bases. They are on the screen sitting right in front of us. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and keep learning.
Imagine trying to organize an event for 1 billion people. Now imagine having to do it constantly, year after year. Let's jump right into this explainer on a truly monumental structural reform, one that could completely rewrite how the world's largest democracy actually votes. You know, if you follow global politics at all, you know that managing any election is a massive logistical undertaking, but doing it continuously across different states at completely different times, that creates a very unique set of pressures. So today, we're unpacking a proposed transformation known as One Nation, One Election, or ONO for short. We're going to look strictly at the data, the history, and the proposed frameworks to understand exactly what this means for India.
So, what if a country of 1 billion people voted all at once? Seriously, think about that for a second. That question isn't just theoretical anymore, it goes right to the heart of India's democratic machinery. We aren't just talking about some minor administrative tweak here. We are looking at a complete overhaul of the entire electoral calendar. The sheer logistical, financial, and political gravity of coordinating a single, synchronized vote of this scale literally cannot be overstated.
So here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to define what One Nation election is, look at how the cycle originally broke, discuss why this reform is so important, check out the current state of play, dive into the federal challenges and proposed fixes, and finally conclude with what a synchronized future might look like.
All right, Section 1. What is One Nation election? Let's just get straight into the core concept.
Basically, ONO is a massive reform proposing the synchronization of Lok Sabha, state legislative assemblies, and local body elections all into one unified phased voting window. The crucial takeaway here is that ONO aims to align all these scattered voting schedules across the entire country into a single streamlined event. Because right now, India is basically in a state of perpetual elections. I mean, it's kind of exhausting just to think about. You've got different states holding assembly elections at totally different times throughout a 5-year cycle. Those are separate from the national Lok Sabha elections and separate again from local body elections. ONO says, let's bring them all together. Instead of voting year-round in different pockets of the country, citizens would vote in one organized, phased window.
Moving on to Section 2. How did the cycle break? Let's take a quick look at the history of synchronization.
Get this. Synchronized voting isn't actually a new experiment for India. Believe it or not, the country successfully held simultaneous elections right up until 1967. The rhythm was completely synced up. But then, the cycle broke. Premature dissolutions of state assemblies completely disrupted that rhythm. It knocked the schedules out of alignment, creating the staggered, continuous cycle we see today. Fast forward to today, and there is a massive push to bring that old system back. Right now, a joint parliamentary committee is targeting 2026 to refine the legal mechanisms. And their goal? A highly ambitious target of having simultaneous general elections fully operational by 2029.
Section 3. Why is this reform important? Let's talk about the prospects and, honestly, the massive savings on the table.
7 lakh crore rupees. Let that number sink in. Holding staggered elections constantly is an absolute drain on the national exchequer. According to expert panels, bringing national and state elections back into synchronization could generate that staggering amount, 7 lakh crore rupees in economic savings. Instead of pouring massive funds into running perpetual campaigns and setting up endless voting booths year after year, that money could literally be redirected into long-term infrastructure and national development.
But hey, the prospects go way beyond just the cash. Continuous elections trigger what experts call policy paralysis. See, every time an election is announced, the Model Code of Conduct, or MCC, is imposed. During that time, the government is blocked from announcing new developmental projects or major administrative decisions. When you have elections constantly happening, development effectively halts for months on end. Imagine trying to run a country where infrastructure projects are just constantly put on pause. Furthermore, synchronizing the vote frees up thousands of security personnel, letting them actually focus on national security instead of guarding voting booths year-round. Plus, it relieves government teachers. By removing these perpetual election duties, teachers can actually get back to their primary job, focusing on education.
All right, Section 4.
With those massive benefits on the table, where does the government stand right now? Let's look at the current state of play.
To tackle this, a high-level committee was formed, led by former President Ram Nath Kovind. And this committee didn't just look at the idea in theory, they thoroughly analyzed the practical framework. Their report recommends a very clear, phased implementation. They suggest starting by synchronizing the Lok Sabha and state assembly elections first. This lays down a practical foundation before expanding the whole thing to local bodies. It's a very calculated, step-by-step approach to what is, frankly, an overwhelming logistical challenge. So how does this translate into actual law? Well, we are currently seeing active parliamentary panels refining what is known as the 129th Constitutional Amendment Bill. This is the specific legal mechanism being hammered out by the 2026 Joint Parliamentary Committee that we mentioned earlier. They're designing it precisely to hit that 2029 target. So, the wheels are very much in motion on a legislative level.
Which brings us to Section 5, Federal Challenges and Fixes. Let's look at the constitutional hurdles, because transforming a democratic structure of this size is incredibly complex. The constitutional hurdles here are massive. To legally implement one nation, one election, multiple articles of the Constitution have to amend it, specifically Articles 83, 85, 172, and 174. Those govern the lifespans and dissolution of Parliament and state assemblies. That alone is a heavy lift. But on top of that, it demands ratification from at least half the states in the country. This requires deep political consensus across heavily divided party lines. And honestly, this brings us to a major, valid concern from critics, the fear of overshadowing regional issues. The argument goes like this. If state and national elections happen on the exact same day, massive national narratives might completely swallow up localized state-specific issues. Critics warn this could severely disadvantage regional political parties. It's a vital federal concern that definitely has to be navigated carefully.
And then there's what I call the ultimate mechanical challenge, the premature collapse dilemma. Imagine the synchronized cycle is running perfectly, but then, in year 2, a state coalition suddenly collapses, or a government falls to a no-confidence motion. This creates a really complex constitutional puzzle. How do you handle the remaining 3 years of that state's term? If you just hold a fresh election for a new full 5-year term, boom, you instantly break the national synchronization cycle. So how do you govern that state without ruining the schedule for the rest of the country?
To solve that exact puzzle, experts are looking at a brilliant solution from an international perspective. They are proposing the adoption of a clever German political model known as a constructive vote of no confidence. Under this model, a sitting government simply cannot be dismissed unless an alternative majority leader is simultaneously elected right then and there. It completely prevents governments from falling into a political vacuum. Basically, if a coalition falls apart, the opposition must already have the numbers to instantly form a new government. This ensures continuity, avoids premature dissolutions, and most importantly for this reform, it keeps that crucial electoral cycle perfectly intact.
Finally, Section 6, Conclusion. Are we looking at a synchronized future? Let's pull all these threads together based on everything we've explored today.
Ultimately, to sum up the core objective of this proposal, ONOE is a monumental structural reform that aims to transition India from a perpetual election mode into an uninterrupted development mode. By ending the constant imposition of the Model Code of Conduct, saving massive amounts of exchequer funds, and freeing up the national workforce, this proposed synchronized democracy is envisioned as a pathway to a highly stable, continuous, and prosperous nation.
But, as we've seen, the path there is anything but simple. As India races toward its 2029 target, it leaves us with one incredibly vital question. Will this reform successfully transition the nation into uninterrupted development? Or are the constitutional hurdles of federalism, amending the Constitution, gaining state consensus, and protecting those regional voices, simply too steep to overcome? It is a balancing act of epic proportions between the promise of a unified, efficient democracy against the intricate realities of a vast federal system. Keep your eyes on this one, because this incredible structural debate is just getting started.